Picture the cleanest house you can imagine. Scrubbed floors, starched linen, white gloves on the butler, a parlour so polished you could eat off every surface and probably be expected to. Now imagine that inside every mattress in that house, inside every wall crack and every bed frame joint and every fold of expensive wallpaper. Something is waiting for you. Something flat and reddish-brown and no bigger than an apple seed. Something that has been living in that house since before the current family moved in. Something that their grandmother's grandmother also had, and their grandmother's grandmother's grandmother before that, going all the way back through the centuries to the Roman legions who first brought them to Britain in their baggage. That's a Victorian townhouse in 1862. Respectable. Expensive, absolutely crawling, and nobody will admit it. That's the thing about bedbugs in Victorian England that nobody tells you. The Victorians were obsessed with cleanliness. Obsessed. They invented the public health movement and built sewers under their cities and wrote pamphlets about the moral virtue of soap. They looked at the poor and said the reason the poor were poor was because the poor were dirty. Filth was a moral failing. Cleanliness was next to godliness. They believed this absolutely. They built their entire social order on it. And then they went to bed every night in houses that were infested top to bottom with Simex lectularius, the common bedbug, and they did not talk about it. The rich ones called them mahogany flats, because the bugs were reddish-brown, the colour of good Victorian furniture, flat as a coin when they hadn't fed recently, hidden in the joints of your mahogany bed frame during the day where you'd never think to look, coming out at 3 a.m. when your body heat and your breathing told them the meal had arrived. Some people called them wool lice, or redcoats, which seems almost affectionate given what they were doing to you, or chinches, from the old French. The word bedbug itself was considered almost too vulgar to say in polite company. Ladies of a certain class referred to them, if they referred to them at all, as the certain insects, or simply the trouble, the way you might speak of a family scandal in a low voice with your hand near your mouth. You could sleep in a house with several thousand of them and your host would never mention it. You'd find out yourself at 3 a.m, the hard way. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists reading about Victorian sanitary reform in a textbook. We're living it. 1 week, one person, everything they would have seen, smelled, scratched at in the dark, and somehow survived. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you're listening to sleep or if you're one of those people who just likes hearing about the absolutely horrifying realities of domestic life in the 1860s. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Alice Morrow. You're 16 years old, and you have been in London for exactly 4 days when you wake up on a Tuesday morning in October of 1862 and understand, with the specific dawning horror that requires no explanation, that something has been eating you alive. The attic room at number 47 Belgrave Crescent is small. 2 narrow beds, a washstand, a single window that faces a brick wall 3 feet away. The ceiling slopes down so steeply that you can only stand upright in the centre of the room. The other bed belongs to Nora, who is 18 and has been in service for 2 years and has the settled, slightly hardened manner of someone who has decided to think of themselves as a professional. You share a mattress of ticking stuffed with wool flock. The wool flock is old. It has been slept on by at least 4 previous under-housemaids that you know of, and probably several more before them. The smell of it is faintly animal, warm and close, not exactly unpleasant on its own. Or it wasn't when you arrived on Thursday evening. Now it is Tuesday morning and you are lying on your side with your knees drawn up and your left arm out, and the inside of your left arm from the wrist to the elbow has approximately 37 raised red welts on it, in a line so neat it looks almost deliberate. 3 bites here, a gap, then 3 more, then 4, then 3. A wandering trail, really, following the veins where the blood runs closest to the surface. Following the heat, you stare at them. They don't hurt exactly, they itch. A deep, structural itch that seems to come from somewhere beneath the skin, not from the surface, so that scratching does almost nothing except make the skin raw on top, while the real itch continues underneath, untouched. You scratch anyway, obviously. The church outside rings 5:30. You have to be downstairs in 25 minutes. Nora is already dressing. She ties her apron with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done it 3,000 times and will do it 3,000 more, and she glances at your arm when you sit up and push back the blanket. She does not say anything, but her eyes do something. A slight tightening, recognition. She looks away again before you can ask. You file that look away for later. Right now, the washstand. The water in the jug is cold enough that your breath fogs. London cold, which is a different thing from the Lincolnshire cold you grew up with. Lincolnshire cold is open and sharp and smells of frozen fields. London cold is damp and grey, and smells of coal smoke and something underneath the coal smoke that you haven't been able to identify yet. Something dark and old and organic, like the city is breathing on you. You wash your face and your hands. The water turns faintly pink-grey when you wring out the cloth, the grime of yesterday layered over the grime of the day before. You've been told you may have a proper bath on Sunday evenings if you finish your duties by 7. You've not yet had a Sunday evening off. You're beginning to understand that you may not have one for some time. The bites on your arm pulse softly. You pull your sleeve down over them and tie it at the cuff. There. Gone. You're a professional. You came to London from a village outside Brigg in Lincolnshire, which is a place that most people in London have never heard of and, if they have no particular feelings about. You came with a character reference written by the vicar's wife, who had known your mother before your mother died, and who described you in the reference as honest, willing, and of good moral character, which you appreciated even as you suspected she was leaving out words like quiet and perhaps a bit too serious and not one for laughing much. The reference secured you this position, under housemaid at a good house in Belgravia, which is one of the most expensive neighbourhoods in London, which means almost nothing to you except that the streets are very clean and the houses are very large, and the people walking the pavement look as though they have never once in their lives been uncertain about where the next meal was coming from. The family is called Hartwell. Mr. Edward Hartwell, who is 44 and works in something connected to the railways, you aren't entirely sure what. Mrs. Catherine Hartwell, who is 38 and has opinions about everything in the house, from the temperature of the soup to the precise angle at which the mirrors should be tilted. Miss Harriet Hartwell, who is 17 and therefore almost your age, and about as similar to you as a swan is to a sparrow. And Master George Hartwell, who is 12 and is away at school and matters very little to your day-to-day life, except as a source of twice-yearly additional laundry. Below stairs there is Mrs. Beach the cook, who is broad and capable, and has been cooking for this family for 11 years, and regards the kitchen as her sovereign territory. There is Mr. Plum the butler, who is thin and correct and seems to carry himself as though his spine were made of something expensive. There is Elsie the scullery maid, who is 14 and has red chapped hands and a permanently startled expression. And there is Nora, your fellow housemaid, who knows where everything is and does not waste words. You do not count Thomas the footman because Thomas works the front of the house and exists in a slightly different world, one that involves wearing a livery coat and opening doors and looking decorative, and the only times you see him are at meals and at prayers in the morning, and even then he has a way of standing that suggests he considers himself to be in a different social category from the rest of you, which Mrs. Beach finds hilarious in a way she expresses only through a slight compression of her lips. Your work is the house. Everything that the family touches you have cleaned before they touched it, and will clean again after. The grates in the bedrooms and the sitting rooms, emptied and relaid with fresh coal and paper and kindling before 5:30 every morning while the family sleeps. The hearth tiles scrubbed with black lead polish on Mondays, the specific smell of which, dense, metallic, faintly sulphurous, has already become associated in your mind with the feeling of being on your knees in the cold dark. The carpets beaten on Tuesdays, draped over the iron railing in the backyard and beaten with a long-handled paddle until the dust comes out in clouds that hang in the damp morning air and settle back on you. The brass is polished on Wednesdays. The windows cleaned on Thursdays with vinegar water and newspaper, the linen aired on Fridays, the silver on Saturdays belongs to Plum. 4 days in, you have learned the following things. Coal dust works into the creases of your knuckles and stays there. Black-lead polish tastes metallic even if you never put it near your mouth, because you breathe it in while you work. The family's bedrooms smell different from the servants' rooms. Not cleaner, necessarily. Different. Warmer and heavier, scented with the perfume bottles on the dressing table and something underneath them. Something sweet and close, like fruit that's been kept slightly too long. You noticed it your first morning, before you knew the word for what you were smelling. Before you knew you were smelling anything at all. Now you know. The stairs from the attic are steep and uncarpeted, and you have learned to go down them sideways in the dark to avoid catching your boot heel. The main staircase is carpeted in deep red, and the banisters are polished mahogany, and the hall below smells of beeswax and coal smoke, and Mr. Plum's hair oil. You use neither of these. Your route is the back stairs, which are narrow and bare and smell of cabbage and lye soap, and the particular earthy smell of a house's working body. The parts nobody is supposed to see. Mrs. Beach is already in the kitchen when you arrive. She's always already in the kitchen. You're starting to suspect she simply sleeps there standing upright like a horse. Late, she says, without looking up from the stove. 5:53, you say. I have 7 minutes. You have 5. I count from when the range is lit, not when the clock strikes. She turns and looks at you properly for the first time that morning. Mrs. Beach is a woman of considerable physical presence, broad-shouldered and heavy-handed, with a face that has settled into authority the way a house settles into its foundations over decades. She looks at you the way she looks at ingredients brought up from the larder, assessing. Your face is puffy. I didn't sleep well. Show me your hands. You show her your hands, not your arm. Hands. She looks at them briefly. Washing too hard. Use less pressure on the scrubbing brush or you'll have cracks before Christmas. She turns back to the range. Grates first. Miss Harriet's room wants special attention this morning. She complained about dust on the mantelpiece yesterday. You collect the grate tools from the scullery. The housemaid's box is small and heavy. Black lead paste, a stiff brush, a softer brush, a cloth for polishing. The handle of the brush has been used by enough of previous hands that the wood is smooth and dark with oil. worn to the exact shape of a grip. You have blisters on your right palm from it, small, tight ones that have become hard calluses at their centre. In a few months they'll be permanent. The Hartwell house is 5 stories, not counting the basement. 3 stories of family rooms, 1 story of servants' quarters at the top, basement kitchen and laundry and coal cellar below. The grates number 11. Basement kitchen, scullery, housekeeper's room, 3 main floor reception rooms, 4 upstairs bedrooms, and the servants' sitting room that is used perhaps once a week, and mostly serves as somewhere cold to store things. You do 6 of the 11. Nora does 5. This is the arrangement. Miss Harriet's room is on the 2nd floor, facing the street. It is a room that has been composed rather than simply furnished. A deliberate arrangement of colour and texture that speaks of considerable money spent with considerable taste. The wallpaper is pale green with a pattern of small white flowers that runs in vertical stripes from floor to ceiling. The curtains are heavier, a deeper green with a cream lining, hung from a mahogany pole with brass rings. The carpet is rose-coloured and very deep, and you've been told that beating it requires a lighter hand than the hall carpet or it loses its pile. The bed is against the inner wall, a half-tester of mahogany, the headboard carved with small scrolls, the mattress spring-filled and topped with a feather bolster and 3 feather pillows and a quilted counterpane in cream silk. You do the grate first. Rake the ash gently. Miss Harriet is a light sleeper and the family does not rise until 7, which means you are working 2 floors below the master bedroom and 1 floor below Miss Harriet, and you do this in near silence, every movement measured and controlled. The ash falls into the pan. The smell is cold and grey, the specific dead smell of last night's fire. You brush the tile surround. You apply black lead to the ironwork with the stiff brush, working it in circles, then buff it with the softer brush until it shines. The smell of the paste fills the air around you, dense and heavy and not quite covering the other smell in the room. That smell again. You stop. You hold very still. It is faint but real, sweet and faintly rotten. Not the smell of unwashed human, not the smell of the chamber pot, which is empty and has been washed. Something else, something that reminds you almost of overripe summer berries crushed underfoot, warm and sweet, and with something underneath the sweetness that turns your stomach very slightly. You look at the bed. Miss Harriet is not in it. She has the habit, apparently, of sleeping until 9 when her schedule allows, and this is not one of those mornings. The bed is made in that approximate way of someone who has pulled the counterpane straight themselves, rather than waiting for a housemaid, the pillows slightly lopsided, the tuck on the left side looser than the right. You look at the bed frame. The joints between the headboard and the side rails are just visible. Dark wood, good craftsmanship, the kind of furniture that has lasted generations because it was built to last. And in the crack of the joint where the 2 pieces of wood meet, there is a smear of something, rust-coloured. You would think it was polish residue or old varnish, except that it is slightly greasy in its quality, and it is in a place that would not normally receive polish. You know what it is. You know it in your gut before you know it in your mind. Lincolnshire is not London. Lincolnshire is not wealthy. The farm workers' cottages outside Brigg are old, and sometimes damp, and the walls sometimes weep when the autumn rains come. Your grandmother's house had them. She boiled the bed frame every spring in a great copper pot of water and vinegar, and she called it doing the bed, never naming what she was doing it for, the same way she called the privy the little house, and called death going to the angels. a whole vocabulary of avoidance built up over a lifetime of things that needed doing but not mentioning. You know the smell. You're 16 and standing in one of the most expensive bedrooms in one of the most expensive streets in the most expensive city in the world, and you know the smell. The mahogany flats, the certain insects. You finish the grate, you stand up, you take your tools and your box and you leave the room precisely as you found it. The mantelpiece, which you dust while you're there, comes up spotless, downstairs. Mrs. Beach is making bread now, her forearms floury to the elbow, the heavy sound of dough being turned and pressed filling the kitchen. "Miss Harriet's mantelpiece done?" she asks. "Yes." "Good." Breakfast tray at 7:15. You eat your own breakfast at 6, bread and dripping, a cup of tea that is strong and dark and slightly too hot, exactly the right temperature if you're standing in a cold kitchen and need to be warm fast. Elsie is eating with her elbows on the table, which Mrs. Beach has told her not to do, and not looking at anyone, which is Elsie's primary mode of existence. Thomas comes down in his shirt sleeves, which is the only time he looks like a person, rather than a piece of furniture. Nora reads from a copy of something small and printed that she keeps in her apron pocket, and replaces whenever Mrs. Beach looks her way. You eat and do not speak and think about the smell in Miss Harriet's room. You think about the bites on your arm, which are now itching so thoroughly that you have to press your elbow against your side to stop yourself scratching through the fabric of your sleeve. You think about Nora's expression this morning, that brief tightening, recognition. After breakfast, you wash your cup and plate and dry them and put them away, and while Elsie's back is turned and the others are filing out of the kitchen, you say quietly to Nora, who is last in line, "The second-floor room. Have you noticed a smell?" Nora stops. She looks at the door. She looks at you. Her voice drops to the level of someone who has learned the hard way that sound travels in a house. "When did you get bites?" "A few nights ago." "How many?" "A lot." A pause. Very small, very controlled. "Don't scratch them where anyone can see." "I know." "And don't," she says very carefully, "say anything to Mrs. Beach yet. Not until you're sure." She goes through the door. The subject is closed. You learn immediately that this is the shape of information below stairs. A sentence, a warning, and then the door shuts and you're left to work it out yourself. You're sure. You've been sure since you stepped into Miss Harriet's room and the smell hit you. But you understand what Nora is telling you. In this house, in this world, saying anything about this at the wrong moment to the wrong person could end your employment before the week is out. There is a logic to it that you will spend the next several days understanding more fully. A logic that says the person who names the trouble is often blamed for the trouble, because naming it means you were close enough to notice it, and being close enough to notice it means being the kind of person who might have brought it with her from wherever she came from a farm worker's cottage in Lincolnshire, for example. That is what Nora is telling you, carefully, without saying it. You go and do the grates in the 3 main floor reception rooms. You work efficiently and quietly. The drawing room is cool, the fire not yet lit, the morning light coming through the tall windows in that grey October way that makes everything look like a pencil drawing. The furniture in here is extraordinary to you even now, 4 days in. A chaise longue upholstered in striped silk, pale gold and cream, the kind of thing that looks as though it would break if you sat on it wrong. Display cabinets with glass fronts showing porcelain figures and small carved items and things you have no name for. A Turkish carpet of deep reds and blues, whose pile is so dense your boot makes no sound crossing it. You clean the grate and dust the mantelpiece and do not touch anything else. You have been told twice that in the drawing room you touch nothing except what you're specifically there to clean, but you look. The fireplace surround in the drawing room is black marble, quite grand, and the mantelpiece clock above it is in a glass dome. The sofa and chairs are grouped around it with the careful social geometry of a room designed for entertaining. Everything in this room is intended to be looked at, to say things about the family that owns it. Look how tasteful we are. Look how considered, how clean and ordered and properly arranged in the join between the baseboard and the plaster, where the wall meets the floor in the corner behind the chaise longue. There is a dark smear, barely visible, that the same part of you that noticed the mark on Miss Harriet's bed frame now notes and files away. The dining room grate, the morning room grate. In the morning room you find one. On the window sill, in the deep shadow of the curtain, hem where the fabric pools slightly on the floor, a single bedbug, flat as a wafer, reddish-brown, moving with the slow, purposeful deliberateness of something that has not been disturbed in some time. You look at it. It keeps walking. You could crush it. You think about it for a moment. You do not. You put the curtain straight and leave the morning room and go downstairs and wash your hands at the scullery sink with lye soap until the water runs clear. By the time you're done, Mrs. Beach is calling for the breakfast tray, and the house is waking up, and your moment of solitary knowledge is over. Now there are people to move around, and errands to run, and beds to strip and remake. And by 9 in the morning you have been working for 3.5 hours, and your lower back aches from kneeling at grates, and your arm burns where the bites are, and you have not stopped moving for long enough to think. This is the shape of a housemaid's day in 1862. You move, you do not stop. There is always a next thing, and then a next thing after that, and the pause between them is so thin you could cut yourself on it. You strip the beds in order of importance. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell's room first, Miss Harriet's second, the guest room third. The guest room has been empty for 3 weeks, and will stay empty until Christmas, when Mrs. Hartwell's sister comes up from Hampshire. The sheets in there are slightly damp from disuse, cool and faintly musty. You remake the bed with fresh linen from the airing cupboard, which is in the passage near the first landing, and smells strongly of lavender from the bags Mrs. Beach insists on tucking between the shelves. Lavender is supposed to repel insects. This is a thing that people have believed for centuries. They believe it in 1862. You will hear it stated with considerable confidence from Mrs. Beach, and from Mrs. Hartwell, and from Miss Harriet, and from the woman who does the laundry on Thursdays. None of them will consider for very long the question of whether it is working. You air the mattresses, you flip them, you tuck the corners with the precision Mrs. Beach demonstrated your first morning, showing you the proper hospital corner with the calm authority of someone who knows there is a right way and a wrong way, and only one is acceptable. The mattress in Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell's room is a spring mattress, expensive, heavy, covered in ticking with a faint blue stripe. You can feel the springs when you press down, the individual points of resistance, and you think about them as you flip it. The springs, the ticking, the batting underneath, the little spaces at the edge where the fabric is stitched to the frame, the rolled border, the seams. You don't look. You made a decision on the stairs coming up that you would not look, because once you start looking, you will not be able to stop, and then Nora's very careful warning will have been for nothing. The smell is faint in here, very faint. Or maybe you are imagining it. You finish the mattress and make the bed and move on. In Miss Harriet's room, you make the bed without allowing yourself to look at the headboard joints. You do this by the simple method of looking only at the linen, pulling it straight, tucking the corners, smoothing the counterpane, turning down the top sheet exactly 4 inches the way Mrs. Beach specified, which Miss Harriet prefers. You work quickly. Your hands know what to do. Your eyes look at the window when the bed is done, at the October sky above the brick walls and the tidy line of chimney pots, grey and unremarkable. The pigeons picking their way along the ridgeline with the self-important concentration of small creatures with very limited agendas. By 10 o'clock you're on the landing with a mop and bucket, and the landing smells of vinegar water, and your knees hurt from the morning's kneeling, and your arm hurts from the morning's scratching that you've been trying not to do, and your lower back has progressed from aching to a dull, specific complaint in the region of the left hip. You're 16 and healthy and strong, and you hurt all over before the morning is half done. This is normal. Every under-housemaid in every house in this street hurts like this. Every one of them is doing exactly what you're doing, making the invisible work of keeping a house clean and comfortable happen before the family is fully awake, then maintaining it through the day, then undoing the day's accumulation in the evening. They are invisible. That is not a metaphor. The social architecture of the Victorian household is literally built around the invisibility of service. The back stairs exist so you don't have to cross the main staircase when the family might see you. The green baize door between the kitchen and the main house muffles sound in both directions. Your uniform, black dress, white apron, white cap, is a costume that makes you look more like a piece of the house than a person in it. When you move through a room while the family is present, you do not make eye contact. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not exist as a full person. You exist as the function you are performing. You're not bitter about this. Not exactly. It is simply the reality of your position. And understanding reality clearly is something you were taught to do by a mother who had no patience for soft thinking. She died of a fever when you were 12 and left you with a vicar's wife's goodwill and a capacity for clear observation of difficult things that will serve you better in the long run than almost any other quality you possess. What you observe clearly is this. The house at number 47 Belgrave Crescent has bedbugs. It has them in the second-floor bedrooms at minimum, almost certainly elsewhere. The family either does not know, which seems impossible, given that someone sleeps in those rooms every night, or knows and does not name it, which is the other option, and is, you're beginning to understand, the more likely one. The Victorian capacity for not naming things is profound. They don't talk about death by name. They pass away or depart. They don't talk about sex by name. They discuss delicate matters or simply don't discuss them at all. They have a whole vocabulary of circumlocution built around anything that involves bodies doing uncomfortable, undignified or morally compromised things. And bedbugs, in 1862 in Belgravia, fall into all 3 categories at once. They are a bodily problem and an undignified one, and their presence implies, however unfairly, a failure of the standards that define people like the Hartwells from people who cannot afford to have standards. So they don't say it. They live with the sweet, rotten smell, and the 3 in the morning wakefulness, and the marks on the sheets that get explained as ink stains or flecks from the coal fire, and they don't say it, until they can't not say it any longer. That point arrives on the morning of your 5th day in service, which is a Wednesday, which is brass polishing day. You're in the back drawing room with the brass candlesticks arranged on newspaper on the table, working methodically with the polishing paste, when you hear Mrs. Hartwell's voice from the floor above. You cannot make out the words from here, but the tone is clear, controlled but with something underneath it, a kind of compressed urgency, the voice of a woman who is accustomed to never being rattled and is currently being rattled and does not enjoy it. You hear Nora's voice in response, quieter, shorter. Then Mrs. Hartwell's voice again. Then silence. Nora comes downstairs 12 minutes later. She looks straight ahead until she reaches the kitchen, where she pauses at the sink and runs cold water over her wrists, which is a thing she does when she needs a moment, you've noticed. Then she dries her hands and comes to find you in the drawing room. She stands in the doorway. She looks at you for a moment with that assessing quality she has, not unkind but entirely practical. Mrs. Hartwell has found marks on Miss Harriet's sheets, she says. Small brown marks. She says it's from the water in the area. The water from the basin staining the linen. You wait. She's asked Mrs. Beach to add more starch to the wash to prevent it. You keep polishing the candlestick. The brass comes up warm and golden under the cloth. Nora, you say. Yes. The marks on the sheets aren't from the water. No, she says. They're not. She comes fully into the room and closes the door behind her and sits down across the table from you, and for the first time since you arrived, she speaks to you not as a colleague delivering operational information, but as a person who has something she needs to say. She knows, Nora says. Mrs. Hartwell. She knows what they are. She's known for a while. Miss Harriet's been complaining about itching for a month, but as long as nobody says it directly, it isn't happening. But it is happening. Yes, but there's a difference between happening and being named. Once you name it, you have to do something about it. And doing something about it means admitting it to someone outside the household. And admitting it to someone outside the household means the neighbourhood knows. And in this neighbourhood, she says, that is a catastrophe. You have finished the first candlestick, you start the second. The paste smells sharp and chemical, a clean manufactured smell that is the opposite of the smell upstairs. Someone needs to do something, you say. Someone will, but it won't be us. Who then? She looks at you. If it gets bad enough, they call a man. What man? And there it is. The thing that opens the whole story wide. A bug man, Nora says. They call a bug destroyer. Let me tell you about bug destroyers, because they are one of the stranger professions to come out of the Victorian period, which is saying quite something in an era that also produced professional rat catchers and ladies stocking knitters, and men whose entire business was collecting dog excrement from the streets to sell to tanneries for processing leather. A bug destroyer is exactly what it sounds like. A professional exterminator, except in 1862 the word exterminator is not really used. He is a destroyer, a man who comes to your house with his tools and his knowledge and his professional discretion, and who looks at the problem that you have not been able to name, and who names it for you, quietly, in a room with the door closed, and then makes arrangements to address it. They are expensive. They are discreet. They have to be both things because their business depends entirely on the willingness of wealthy people to pay handsomely to make a shameful thing go away without it becoming known that the shameful thing existed. The aristocracy, the upper middle class, the merchant class, the aspirant professional class, all of them have used bug destroyers. Most of them have done it in a way that involves the man arriving in a plain cart, not a liveried one, and entering through the back of the house and departing the same way, and his invoice, when it arrives, describing his services in language general enough that the housekeeper can file it without anyone asking questions. There is a firm in the city, Tiffin and Son. They have been destroying bugs in London households since before the current generation of bugs was born, which is a sentence that is true if you consider that bedbugs live for about a year and reproduce prodigiously. So the bugs in this house are direct descendants of bugs that were in this house when the Hartwells moved in a decade ago, which are in turn descended from bugs that were in the house before that, going back possibly to the original construction in the 1820s. Tiffin and Son have a small advertisement in the Times on occasion. They are appointed to Her Majesty's household. This last fact, which is absolutely true, is perhaps the most eloquent statement possible about the universality of the problem. Even Buckingham Palace. Even there. But that is something polite people do not say in 1862. The knowledge of bug destroyers sits in the back of your mind while the days proceed. You observe, you work, you learn the rhythms of number 47 with the speed of someone who has no choice but to learn them, because the alternative is error, and error has consequences. Mrs. Beach, on your 6th morning, teaches you how to black the kitchen range properly. The range is a large iron monster that takes up most of the kitchen wall, 2 ovens and a warming plate and a hot water tank, and it requires maintenance every morning of a kind that involve a wire brush, a polishing brush, a tin of black lead paste, and about 45 minutes on your knees. The smell of the paste at close range, your nose 12 inches from the surface you're working, is dense and mineral and slightly suffocating. Your eyes water. The iron is warm from yesterday's fire, and the paste goes on stiff in the cool of the morning, and you have to work it in with the stiff brush before the softer one can bring up the shine. Pressure, Mrs. Beach says, watching. Not too much. You're polishing, not scrubbing. You adjust. The brush moves in circles. The iron comes up from dull grey to a flat, deep black, not shiny, but with a kind of depth to it, the way something looks when it's been properly cared for rather than just cleaned. Better. Now, the doors. The oven doors have small hinges and a latch on each, and the latch is brass and has to be polished separately with a different cloth. You crouch lower, your back complains again. The kitchen floor at this hour is cold stone under your knees, and you have a folded piece of old blanket that Elsie showed you on the first day, tucked behind the coal scuttle, which the other girls use as a knee cushion. It does not help very much, but it helps somewhat. Mrs. Beach, you say, while you work. Blacklead paste. What else does it do? She looks at you sideways. What do you mean? What else does it do? It cleans the range. I mean, is there anything else people use it for? She's quiet for a moment. A professional quiet. She knows what you're asking without you having said it. Nora told you this about Mrs. Beach. That she's been in service for 30 years in houses where a great deal of information flows through the kitchen, and she has developed an almost supernatural ability to understand what is actually being asked when someone asks a question they aren't asking directly. Some people use turpentine, she says finally, on wood, on the cracks, gets into the joints. Does it work? Another pause. She turns back to the bread she's proving on the shelf above the range, which is the official subject of her attention, and speaks to it rather than to you. Sometimes, for a while. You need more than turpentine for a proper job. She does not say more than turpentine for a proper job what is. You understand that the conversation is over. But the word turpentine sits in your mind for the rest of the morning with a specific quality, the way useful information does. Not urgent yet. Filed. On your 7th day, which is a Thursday, something changes. You're emptying the ashes from Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell's bedroom fireplace, working quietly in the pre-dawn dark when you notice that Mrs. Hartwell is not in the bed. This is unusual. The family does not rise until 7. The clock on the mantelpiece reads 5:21. The bed is visible in the ambient light from the window, the curtains not quite meeting in the centre where they were drawn the night before, and the bed has the uneven topography of a single person sleeping in it rather than two. Mr. Hartwell is there, turned away from you on the far side, a large still shape under the counterpane. The nearer side is empty. This is not your business. You do the grate. You work in silence. You're almost done when you hear, from the dressing room adjacent to this one, a small room with a chaise longue and a looking-glass and Mrs. Hartwell's wardrobe, a sound, not a large sound, a small, controlled, specific sound, the sound of someone scratching, methodically, the particular rhythm of someone who's been awake in the dark, itching, and has given up trying not to scratch. You finish the grate, you leave quietly, the way you came in. On the back stairs you stand still for a moment in the dark with the housemaid's box in your hands and the smell of black lead on your fingers, and you understand something very clearly. Mrs. Hartwell has been awake at night. She's sleeping in the dressing room. She knows precisely what is happening in her bed. She has known for some time, and she has been doing nothing, saying nothing, moving herself to another room and leaving her husband to sleep undisturbed in the infested bed. This is not unusual behaviour. You will learn in the months and years ahead that this is extremely common. The wealthier the household, the more elaborate the strategies for not naming the thing while still accommodating its effects. Mrs. Hartwell is not lying or being stupid or being cowardly. She is doing the only rational thing available to her within the system of convention she inhabits. She is managing the problem privately while preserving the fiction that no problem exists. The problem is that problems managed privately tend to get worse. This one is getting worse. You know this because by the end of your second week, the bites on your arm have been joined by bites on your shoulder and your neck, and Nora has bites on her ankle, and Elsie has bites on both forearms, and has been crying about it in the scullery when she thinks no one can hear, which everyone can because the acoustics of that room send sound very effectively up through the floor to the morning room above, which is a thing Elsie will eventually learn. You know this because the smell in the upper bedrooms is stronger now in the mornings, sweetly rotten and warm, not strong enough to carry to the landing but definite and present the moment you open the door. You know this because you have started, despite yourself, looking. You look at the seams of the mattress when you strip the bed each morning. You look at the joins of the bed frame. You look at the baseboard where it meets the wall, at the edges of the wallpaper where it is beginning to lift slightly near the skirting, which happens in all Victorian houses in autumn, because the paste dries as the house gets warmer from the fires and the paper begins to curl very slightly away from the wall, which creates a gap, narrow as a knife edge, perfectly sized for a bedbug to live in. The wallpaper in Miss Harriet's room is a particular problem. Behind the bed, along the inner wall, the paper has the specific slight texture of something that has been on the wall long enough to become part of it, the surface slightly dimpled and uneven with age. In the corner where the headboard almost meets the wall, there is a shadow that you have been telling yourself is shadow. On a Tuesday morning in your third week, when Miss Harriet has gone out early with her mother to Bond Street for the kind of shopping trip that requires 2 footmen, and most of the morning, you strip the bed and turn the mattress with Nora's help. The spring mattress is heavy, unwieldy, a 2-person job, and you look. The mattress seams are full of them, not dozens, not hundreds. a number between those two things that your mind does not want to count individually. Small flat reddish-brown seeds pressed into the stitching, crowded into the piping along the edge where the ticking meets the rolled border. Some are moving, most are still. Here and there among them are the translucent husks of shed skins, the papery ghosts of earlier instars, which is the word for the developmental stages of an insect, a word you do not yet know but whose reality you're looking at right now, and the dark specks of their waste, and in one cluster near the headboard end, a pale mass of tiny oval eggs, each one barely visible, stuck together in a small constellation. The sweet rotten smell rises up from the disturbed mattress in a soft wave. Nora, holding the other end of the mattress, has gone very still. You put the mattress down. You both step back. You look at each other. "We have to tell Mrs. Beach," you say. "Yes," says Nora. Her voice is very controlled. She's been in service long enough to know how this goes. "Today. After luncheon, not before. She'll need the morning to be calm." You put the mattress back. You remake the bed. You go about the rest of the morning's work. You go about it with a particular quality of focus you have discovered since coming to London. The ability to do one thing completely while another thing sits in a locked room at the back of your mind waiting for the moment when you can deal with it. After luncheon, while Mrs. Hartwell is in the drawing room and Miss Harriet is at her piano practice, and Mr. Plum is polishing silver in his pantry, and Elsie is washing the luncheon dishes, and Thomas has gone to collect something from a shop on Sloane Street, you and Nora stand in the kitchen and tell Mrs. Beach. You tell her factually what you saw in the mattress seams, what you smelled in the rooms, how long, which rooms. Mrs. Beach listens. She stands with her arms folded and her face perfectly still, the expression of someone who is processing information that confirms something she already suspected, which is not the same as being glad to have it confirmed. She's quiet for a long moment. The kitchen fire crackles. The clock on the shelf reads 2:14. "The second floor," she says. "Miss Harriet's room most badly. The master bedroom as well. The morning room, I think, but I haven't confirmed." "And the attic?" "Our room," you say. "Yes." She unfolds her arms and goes to the window. She looks out at the backyard where the washing is on the line, the sheets bright and snapping in the October wind, which is brisk enough that they'll be dry by 5. "I'll speak to Mrs. Hartwell," she says. "She knows," you say. Mrs. Beach turns and looks at you. "She's been sleeping in the dressing room," you say. "She knows." A longer silence. Nora is looking at the floor with the expression of someone who is carefully not having an opinion. Mrs. Beach says, "No, she thinks she knows. There's difference." She straightens her apron. "I'll speak to Mrs. Hartwell this afternoon." She speaks to Mrs. Hartwell this afternoon. You are not in the room. You're upstairs turning down the beds and bringing up the hot water cans for the evening washing and tidying the dressing tables, in preparation for the family's return from whatever the afternoon has held. You hear nothing. You will not hear what was said in that room until Nora tells you that evening, after supper, in the cold attic room, while the October wind finds the gaps in the window frame, and the house settles around you with its small sounds. What was said in that room was this. Mrs. Beach told Mrs. Hartwell that the house had a significant infestation, that it had been present for some time, that it had spread to multiple rooms, that it required professional attention immediately. Mrs. Hartwell asked whether the infestation could have been brought in by the new girl. Mrs. Beach said it could not, as the infestation was clearly of the long-standing, and noted that the previous under-housemaid had also had bites, which she had attributed at the time to something else. Mrs. Hartwell was quiet for a moment. Then she asked whether it could be kept quiet. Mrs. Beach said it could, with the right arrangements. Mrs. Hartwell said she would speak to her husband this evening. Nora tells you this and then lies down on her side of the mattress and pulls the blanket up and is quiet. Outside, a cart goes along Belgrave Crescent. Someone in the house below is playing the piano, something slow and formal. The wind moves along the eaves. Do you think she actually will, you ask? Speak to him? She has to, Nora says. She needs his permission to spend the money. You think about this. In a house where everything requires permission, where the wife manages the domestic economy but cannot authorize significant expenditure without the husband's knowledge, where the staff cannot make decisions without the housekeeper, where the housekeeper cannot make decisions without the mistress, where everyone's authority is conditional and delegated and defined by a hierarchy as rigid as the bones of the house itself. In that house, even getting rid of bedbugs is a political negotiation. How much does a bug destroyer cost? Nora considers. The last time this house used one, she stops, starts again. A house I worked in before. It cost £4 for a 2-room treatment, more for a whole house. £4. Your quarterly wage is £4. You lie in the dark and scratch your arm and think about £4. In the morning there are no new instructions. Mr. Hartwell goes out at 8:30. Mrs. Hartwell is at breakfast when you bring up the tea, and her face is composed and does not give anything away, but her left hand is on the tablecloth beside her cup, and you see the marks on her wrist, 3 in a row, which she has covered with face powder that is not quite the right shade. The household carries on. This is one of the great skills of the well-run Victorian house, its ability to absorb crisis and continue to function. The grates are cleaned, and the beds are made, and the brass is polished, and the meals are cooked and served and cleared and washed. And all of this happens whether or not there is a catastrophe happening in the mattresses, because the house does not stop for catastrophe. The house keeps going because stopping is more frightening than continuing. By Friday of your 3rd week, you have learned to name your bites before you count them. Left arm, 19. Right arm, 7. Left shoulder, 11. Back of the neck, 5. The neck ones are the worst. Something about the proximity to the face makes them feel more invasive, more personal, if that is a coherent thing to feel about an insect bite. Nora's are worse than yours. She's been sleeping in this room longer. The flock in the mattress has been doing what flock does in old mattresses, which is to say it has been compressing and shifting and creating pockets, and in some of those pockets, in the dark warmth of the ticking, something has been making a home. Elsie's bites are the worst of all of you, because Elsie is 14, and from a very poor family in Whitechapel, and has the lean, slightly fragile quality of someone who has not eaten consistently well in their whole life, and her skin marks easily, and she scratches without thinking, and the scratches become raw, and 2 of them have become slightly inflamed, a little hot to the touch, which Mrs. Beach notices on Friday morning when Elsie is washing the breakfast things. Mrs. Beach looks at Elsie's arms with the same calm assessment she uses for everything, and then she goes to the dresser in the corner of the kitchen where she keeps her medicinal supplies. A bottle of iodine, a tin of camphor, a jar of petroleum jelly, several packets of various powders, and she takes a cloth and dampens it with something that smells like vinegar and clean mineral salts, and she holds Elsie's arm and dabs each inflamed mark, which makes Elsie hiss and flinch. "Don't scratch," Mrs. Beach says. "I can't help it." "Yes, you can. You choose to scratch. It's a choice. You need to choose differently." She releases Elsie's arm. and tell me immediately if any of them get worse." "Yes, Mrs. Beach." She goes back to her cooking. Elsie looks at her arms. You're standing behind Mrs. Beach sorting through the bread for the kitchen breakfast, and you catch Elsie's eye over Mrs. Beach's back, and you give her the look that says, "I know, and I know it's not fair, and none of this is your fault." And she nods very slightly and goes back to the washing. This is the invisible economy of shared suffering below stairs. Nobody's going to make an announcement. Nobody's going to be comforted in any substantial way. But there are these small exchanges, these tiny ledger entries of acknowledgement that add up over time to something that is not quite friendship, but is something important, something that functions like it. On Saturday morning, you're told by Nora, who's been told by Mrs. Beach, who has presumably been told by Mrs. Hartwell, all information in this house moving in this single downward direction, that a man is coming on Monday. Nora says it exactly like that. A man is coming on Monday. As though there is only one kind of man who comes unannounced on a Monday in a house with this particular problem. You spend Saturday in a state of anticipation that is, you notice with some surprise, not entirely composed of dread. There is something else in it, a curiosity, a forward-pointing feeling. Because you have been watching this problem from the margins for 3 weeks now, accumulating information in the way you have of accumulating information, quietly through observation, turning it over in your mind during the mechanical work of polishing and scrubbing and making beds. And now something is going to happen. Now the static period is over and the action is beginning. And even when the action is unpleasant, there is a kind of relief in it, a clarity, the way a storm is better than the grey still air before it. Sunday passes. You go to church with Elsie in the morning, because Thomas accompanies Mrs. Beach and Nora goes home to her family in Lambeth when she can, and you sit in the pew at the back of the small church on the side street 2 blocks from Belgrave Crescent, and you listen to the sermon about patience, and you scratch your arm through your Sunday sleeve and think about bedbugs. Monday morning. You are laying the drawing room fire at 5:15 when you hear the service entrance bell at the back of the house. Very soft, reserved. The bell of someone who knows to come quietly. You're not supposed to answer it. That's Elsie's job when she's not at the range, or Mr. Plum's if it's the front door. But you happen to be on the main floor, and Elsie is in the scullery with the range, and Mr. Plum is not yet down, and the bell rings again, slightly more insistently, and you go. The service entrance is off the kitchen passage, a heavy door opening onto the area steps that lead down to the street level at the back of the house. You open it. The man standing there is not what you expected, though you're not entirely sure what you expected. He is perhaps 50, solidly built, with a weathered face and very clean hands, which is the first thing you notice. His hands are clean in the particular way of someone whose professional task involves getting very dirty, and who therefore washes very thoroughly afterward. He's wearing a plain dark coat, not livery, nothing to identify him, and he's carrying a wooden case of the kind a doctor might carry, flat-sided and latched. Behind him on the area steps is a younger man, an assistant or apprentice, similarly plain-dressed, carrying 2 canvas bags that clink softly when he moves. Tiffin, the older man says. It is both his name and his introduction. He says it the way a doctor might say physician, a fact and a title at once. Mrs. Hartwell is expecting me. She is, you say. Please come in. He steps through the door and into the kitchen passage, and his assistant follows, and you lead them to the kitchen where Mrs. Beach is standing at the range with the expression of someone who's organised this and is now in command of its execution. "Mr. Tiffin," she says, "welcome." "Mrs.?" He waits. "Beach, cook and housekeeper. I'll be working with you this morning." He nods. He sets his case on the kitchen table and opens it. You catch a glimpse of the interior: glass bottles with stoppered necks, small metal tools, brushes, a folded document that might be a reference guide or an invoice form. The bottles are dark glass and labelled in a small neat hand. You cannot read the labels from where you're standing. "Which rooms?" he says. Mrs. Beach tells him. He listens without writing it down. He asks 2 questions, both precise and specific. How long has the infestation been present to the family's knowledge, and which rooms are currently occupied during the night? Mrs. Beach answers both questions with the same precise directness. He nods again. He picks up one of the bottles and holds it up to the light from the kitchen window. The glass is amber brown and the liquid inside is clear, catching the light like water except for a slight shimmer, a slight quality of being denser than water. "Mercury sublimate," he says. He's not talking to you. He's confirming to himself, or possibly to Mrs. Beach. 2% solution, for the joints and the seams. He sets it down. Then oil of turpentine for the crevices and the boards. Then the mattresses are to come out. "Come out where?" Mrs. Beach asks. "The yard. They'll need airing and treatment. If the cases are infested, they'll need to be made up again. You have a copper running?" "By 7. He looks at the clock on the kitchen shelf. "Good, we'll start at the top." And he goes, with his assistant, up the back stairs. You're not asked to help immediately. You go back to the drawing-room fire and finish laying it and light it and watch the paper catch and the kindling take. The fire builds with the reliable, uncomplicated logic of fire. Paper, then small sticks, then larger ones, then coal going on in pieces no bigger than your fist, arranged not too tightly so the air can circulate. You have become good at fires. You were not good at them when you arrived. You are good at them now. This is the nature of repeated work. Competence arrives quietly without announcement, and one morning you notice that what was effortful is now easy. By 8 o'clock, when Mrs. Hartwell comes down for breakfast, the treatment has begun. You know this because you can smell it. This smell of mercury sublimate solution is not quite like anything else. It is close to odourless. That is the dangerous thing about it. But it has a quality to the air around it. A faint chemical presence, something at the back of the throat that is not quite a taste and not quite a smell, but registers as both. It comes down through the house very faintly, just detectable on the first floor landing, and you note it without reacting because you've learned in this house that reacting to things draws attention. Mrs. Hartwell sits at the breakfast table. She accepts the tea you bring. Her face is composed. Her wrists are covered by the sleeves of her morning dress. She has put a small vase of late chrysanthemums in the centre of the table, white ones, and their smell is sharp and green and vaguely funerary, and she sits among them and eats her toast and does not mention anything. You carry the plates, you fill the cups, you are invisible. Upstairs, Mr. Tiffin and his assistant are dismantling Miss Harriet's room. You know this because when you go up to the first floor at 8:30, you can hear them through the ceiling. The sound of furniture being moved, the heavy scrape of the bed base across the floor, a rhythmic brushing sound, then silence, then the soft sound of liquid being applied with a brush, the slight squeak of bristle on wood. Mercury sublimate solution, applied with a brush to every crack and joint in the wooden bed frame, every gap in the baseboard, every seam of the wallpaper where it is lifted from the wall. The mercury solution penetrates the cracks. It kills what it touches. It also, and this is the part that Mr. Tiffin's professional discretion probably does not dwell on overly much, releases mercury vapour as it dries, which is colourless and odourless and quite toxic in enclosed spaces, which is why there is a window open on the second floor this October morning that anyone looking at the house from the street might notice, if they were the type to notice open windows. The turpentine comes after, poured into crevices, applied along the baseboards, worked into the floor joints with a narrow brush. The smell of turpentine is immediate and strong, and rises through the house without difficulty, and by 9 o'clock the kitchen smells faintly of it, and Mrs. Beach has opened the kitchen window and is grumbling about it in a low, continuous voice while she works. At 10 o'clock the mattresses come out. You're given this job. You and the assistant, who is perhaps 17, and has a quiet, competent manner, and tells you his name is Jem when you ask, because it seems polite, and because you're going to be carrying heavy objects together for the next hour, and it helps to know what to call someone. The mattresses come down the back stairs one by one. Miss Harriet's first, which is the spring mattress, heavy and awkward, requiring one of you on each end and both of you going sideways down the stairs. The smell when you lift it is strong, the sweet rotten smell amplified by movement, by the disturbance of whatever is living in the seams. Jem wrinkles his nose but does not speak. You both breathe through your mouths and carry the mattress down 3 flights of back stairs and through the kitchen and out into the backyard. The October air hits you cold and clean. The chrysanthemums Mrs. Beach grows in the window box of the kitchen are still blooming, small and defiant, the kind of late flowers that seem to know they're not supposed to be there. The yard is paved in stone flags that are damp from last night's rain. The mattress goes against the wall, back inside, up for the next one. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell's mattress is larger and even heavier. 3 trips up and down the back stairs in under an hour. By the end of it, your arms are burning and your lower back is making specific and detailed complaints. And Jem, despite his quiet manner, is breathing hard. The mattresses stand in the yard like pale rectangular sentinels. Their tick covers damp now from the outside air, their contents exposed to the October light. Mr. Tiffin comes down and examines them with his flat professional eye. He runs a thumb along the seams of each one, pressing in, opening the stitching slightly. He looks at what's in the seams. He nods. He takes one of the canvas bags from his assistant and removes a tin container and a brush. He opens the tin. The smell that comes out of it is sharp and heavy and immediately present. Oil of turpentine, more concentrated than what you encountered inside, the pure industrial version. He applies it with the brush directly to the seams, working it in, working methodically from one end to the other. He does all 3 mattresses. They'll need an hour in the air, he says to Mrs. Beach, who has come out to watch. Then bring them into the copper. The whole mattress? The covers. You'll need to unstitch the seams and remove the filling. The filling goes on the fire. He looks up from the mattress. The frames will take the treatment indoors. The covers through the copper at 90 degrees, long boiled twice. Mrs. Beach writes nothing down. She does not need to. She's a woman who retains what she needs to retain. The wall joints, she says. The paper's lifting in Miss Harriet's room. Tiffin nods. We'll strip it. The paper comes off, treat the plaster, repaper in a fortnight once the plaster's properly dried. You'll need a paper hanger. This is the part where the money starts. The mattress covers, the restuffing, the paper hanger. Mr. Tiffin's fee on top of it. All of it to be arranged, paid for, absorbed into the household accounts under language general enough not to advertise itself. You stand in the yard with the mattresses and your burning arms and look at the damp October sky. A pigeon moves along the top of the wall with its bobbing, self-important walk. Somewhere in the house above you, Miss Harriet is doing her morning correspondence and does not know that her mattress is standing in the yard. Mrs. Hartwell is in the drawing room writing letters and does not want to know that her mattress is standing in the yard. Mr. Hartwell has gone to his club and will not be home until 6, and has made his wishes on this subject clear by going to his club. The house carries on above its own disrupted foundations. By midday, the bedroom floors are being done. You're allowed up to help. The work is this: a long-bristled brush, the mercury solution in a bucket, applied to every baseboard joint and every floor crack and every gap where the floorboards have shrunk away from each other over decades, which in a house this old is a lot of gaps. The smell in the rooms by this point is layered, turpentine dominant and sharp and almost eye-watering, and underneath it the mercury is almost smell, the chemical presence that isn't quite an odour, and underneath that the sweet rotten smell of the bugs themselves being disturbed and dying and drying. You work with Jem. Mr. Tiffin works alone in the master bedroom. Mrs. Beach supervises the kitchen operation where Elsie is boiling the first of the mattress covers in the copper, the fabric churning in the steam, the smell of hot wet ticking and turpentine and lye soap all blending into something that is both nauseating and reassuring, because it is the smell of something being done. In Miss Harriet's room you pull the wallpaper. This is the most dramatic part. A basin of warm water with a splash of vinegar applied to the paper with a sponge, left for 5 minutes to loosen the paste. Then the wallpaper seam knife running along the join, lift in a corner, then pulling. The paper comes away in strips, the green and white flower pattern peeling off the wall in long vertical tongues that curl as they come free, showing the dry grey plaster beneath. Behind the wallpaper, at the seam, in the gap between paper and plaster, where the paste had dried and shrunk away from the wall over the years, you find what you expected to find. What anyone who knew to look would have found months ago. A thin, dark crust along the seam, the residue of many bodies over many months, and among it, not as many as in the mattress, but present, clearly present, flattened forms. Most of them dead now from the treatment, dried and curled at their edges. A few still moving, very slowly disoriented, seeking shelter that has been removed. You strip the paper without expression. Jem works beside you. You've been doing this for 4 hours now, and the two of you have achieved the particular wordless efficiency of people doing unpleasant necessary work together, where you don't need to speak to know what the other person is about to do and whether it requires your assistance. The plaster under the paper is damp in 2 patches near the floor, which is a separate problem that has nothing to do with bedbugs. Victorian houses leak. They leak from the outside and they leak from the inside, and the damp gets into the plaster, and the plaster grows mould, and the mould is another smell in the house's catalogue of smells, earthy and dark and cold. The mould patches will need lime wash after the treatment. Another item for the list. By 3 in the afternoon, the treatment of the second floor is done. Mr. Tiffin and Jem pack their tools. The glass bottles go back into the flat case. The brushes are cleaned with spirits and wrapped in cloth. The mercury solution bucket is covered with a cloth and carried out with specific care, the way you carry something expensive and dangerous. Mr. Tiffin gives Mrs. Beach his instructions for the next fortnight. The windows to stay open in the treated rooms for 2 days, which is going to make November feel like it's arrived early, and which Mrs. Hartwell has already been informed about, and has accepted with the particular tight graciousness of someone accepting something unavoidable. The mattress covers will be restuffed with fresh horsehair once the copper treatment is done, which Mrs. Beach will oversee. The floors to be washed with hot water and washing soda in 3 days, the rooms to be aired daily, the paper hanger to be called in a fortnight for Miss Harriet's room, and the attic. He says it at the end, as an afterthought that is not an afterthought. He says it while putting on his coat. The servants' rooms should be done as well. They're sleeping in the same house. Likely the same infestation has reached the upper floor. Mrs. Beach looks at him steadily. That will add to the bill. It will, he says, but not doing it will mean doing all of this again in 6 months. He looks at her directly. You can't treat a house by halves. The bugs don't stay in the rooms you treat. Mrs. Beach nods. She has known this. She was waiting to hear him say it so it becomes part of his professional recommendation, and therefore part of the bill she can present to Mrs. Hartwell, rather than a decision she's made herself. Thursday, she says. He accepts this. He goes. Jem, behind him, gives you a brief look as he passes. Not a smile exactly. Something in that range. Acknowledgement of shared labour. Then he's gone through the service entrance and up the area steps, and the door closes, and there's just the house again ticking around you. This smell of turpentine in the air, the copper churning in the scullery, Elsie's red chapped hands, the mattresses outside in the October afternoon dripping gently. You stand in the kitchen passage for a moment. Your arms are exhausted. Your lower back has moved past complaint into a flat, continuous ache that you have decided to simply inhabit, the way you inhabit the cold and the dark of the early mornings. Your hands smell of turpentine and mercury solution even though you've washed them twice. The smell is in the skin. It'll take days to fade. Mrs. Beach puts a cup of tea in front of you at the kitchen table without being asked. This is the first time she has done this, which means it is significant. It is her version of saying something she won't say directly. You drink the tea. It's hot and dark and strong, the way tea should be at 3 in the afternoon after a day like this one, and you drink it to the bottom of the cup, and then sit with the empty cup in your hands for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen, while Mrs. Beach starts the evening meal, and Elsie brings in the first of the treated mattress covers, still steaming, held away from her body. The house, above you, is beginning to settle back into itself. The chemical smells will fade. The open windows will let in the cold and the cold smoke of the October afternoon. The mattresses will be restuffed and carried back upstairs and made up with clean linen, and Miss Harriet's room will have bare plaster for a fortnight, where the wallpaper has been stripped, and everyone in the house will describe this, if anyone asks, as some necessary redecoration. Nothing more, nothing to concern yourself with. This is how it works. This is how it has always worked in houses like this one. The problem is addressed with great thoroughness and considerable expense, and then the addressing of it is immediately absorbed into the fiction that no problem existed. The language of avoidance closes back over it the way water closes over a stone. But, you know what was in the mattress, seams, and what was behind the wallpaper, and what the smell meant at 5 in the morning when you opened the bedroom door. You carry this knowledge the way you carry everything, quietly, precisely, without fuss. And here is the thing that takes you weeks to fully understand. though the understanding begins that evening in October and continues through the winter and into the following spring. The bug man is not a fix. He is a treatment. There is a difference. The difference is this. Mr. Tiffin has killed the bugs that were in the treated areas using chemicals that are genuinely effective and also genuinely dangerous, that contain mercury, which is a poison, and turpentine, which is flammable, and which are applied in a house full of wooden structures and coal fires and open flames, and by workers without gloves, because gloves were not part of the professional equipment in 1862, because the understanding of how mercury enters the body through the skin is not yet what it will become. He has killed the bugs that were there. But bedbugs, as you will learn over the coming months, are one of the most physically resilient insects ever to make a home in a human dwelling. They can survive for a year without feeding. They can withstand temperatures that would kill most insects. Their eggs are sticky and hard-shelled and resist many chemical treatments that kill the adults. The ones in the morning room baseboard, which Mr. Tiffin treated less thoroughly because the infestation there was less advanced, are not entirely dead. The ones in the floor crack under the dining room hearthrug, which no one checked because it was not considered likely, are entirely undisturbed. And in a month, when the nights are longer and the house is warmer from the fires, and the family is back in their own beds, and the mattresses are restuffed and recovered, and the whole house is settled back into its routine, the eggs will hatch, not immediately, not all at once. Gradually over the weeks that follow the treatment, you will notice. The first sign will be a single bite, which you will recognize immediately. Then 3 bites, and the smell, faint at first, returning like a held breath finally let out. By January you will tell Mrs. Beach again. She will tell Mrs. Hartwell again. Mrs. Hartwell will send for Mr. Tiffin again. This is the rhythm of the infested Victorian house. Not defeat once and done. A continuous management. A war of attrition that costs money and effort and generates, in the people who live below stairs, a very particular and intimate relationship with a creature that most people in England in 1862 would rather pretend did not exist. On a Thursday morning in November, after the attic treatment has been done, and your own mattress has been through the copper and restuffed with new flock that Mrs. Beach bought from a reputable supplier, and specifically not from the second-hand dealer at the corner of the Pimlico Road, you wake up and your arm does not itch. You lie still for a moment, testing the feeling. The cold comes in through the window gap the way it always does. The church bell rings the half hour before 5:30. Nora is already sitting up, already tying her hair. The new flock in the mattress is different from the old flock, denser and less lumpy, and it smells of clean wool and nothing else. Your arm does not itch. This is a small thing. It is a tiny, quiet, ordinary good thing in a morning of small, ordinary things. But you hold it for a moment, this absence of discomfort, this small mercy, before you get up and put on your clothes and go downstairs to light the fires. You go out to run errands sometimes in the afternoons when Mrs. Beach needs something from the market, or Mrs. Hartwell sends a note down requesting a specific item be collected from a specific shop. You know the streets now, not all of them. London is too large to know all of it, too various, too layered, but your streets. The route from Belgrave Crescent south to the market in Elizabeth Street, and west along the King's Road, and north up Sloane Street past the flower sellers and the chair menders and the sharp-faced boys who offer to carry packages for a halfpenny, and will carry them in the wrong direction if you're not watching. November London has a quality that is entirely its own. The trees have lost their leaves and the bare branches reach up into the grey sky with the particular legibility of winter, every twig defined. The fog has begun, the famous London fog that is not actually fog but the convergence of coal smoke and moisture and the exhalations of 500,000 people and their horses and their factories. A low grey-yellow murk that softens the distances and makes the gaslights look like orange flowers floating at intervals through the grey. The smell of November London is coal smoke above everything else, and beneath it the river, which is always there if the wind is right. The great tidal river that runs through the middle of the city like its spine, carrying the goods of the world and the city's own considerable waste. In 1862 the sewers are being built. The great engineering project of Joseph Bazalgette that will eventually solve the problem of the Thames receiving the entire city's sewage is underway, and you can hear it sometimes when you're in the right part of the city. The sound of digging, the dull percussion of work happening underground. But it is not finished yet, for now the river is still what it has been for centuries. A tidal highway and an open sewer simultaneously, its smell in summer strong enough to make the members of Parliament abandon their riverside chambers, and in November merely a cold, dark, riverine odour that sits at the bottom of everything else like a foundation note. On a Tuesday in November you go to the apothecary on Sloane Street for Mrs. Beach, who needs camphor and a specific preparation for the range polish. The apothecary's shop smells of everything, a dense, complex industrial mix of herbs and chemicals and paper and wax. The jars on the shelves behind the counter contain things you cannot name, variously coloured and variously textured, dried and powdered and bottled and stoppered. The man behind the counter is middle-aged and spectacled, and handles the camphor and the polish preparation with the confident efficiency of someone in their own domain. While he's wrapping the purchase, you look at the shelf behind him, and you see, between a jar of powdered chalk and a preparation in a dark bottle, a small printed card. Exterminating Preparations. Tried and trusted. Tiffin and Son. Established 1750. The same firm. Even in the apothecary, selling their preparations to people who cannot afford the full service, or who are managing on their own between treatments. You think about this as you walk back through the November streets. The whole ecosystem of the problem, the bug destroyers with their professional services, the preparations available to the less wealthy who must do their own management, the second-hand furniture trade that spreads infestations across the city, as beds and chairs and sofas move from house to house, the railway system, new and expanding, its upholstered carriages travelling from city to city, that carries the bugs north and south and west. You have been reading. In the evenings, in the half hour before your eyes give up from tiredness, you read from whatever comes to hand. Nora has a small collection of books and papers that she acquires from various sources, and one of them is a volume, not a luxury item, a small cheap book, the kind sold at railway stations. That is a domestic management guide, the kind of book that Victorian housekeepers considered essential, and that contained advice on everything from preserving fruit to managing servants to dealing with household pests. The section on bugs is practical and unemotional and reads like a military dispatch. They are described as a nuisance of long standing in England. The guide notes that they are found in all classes of dwelling, which is about as close as this kind of publication gets to saying that the problem is universal rather than a mark of poverty or moral failure. The treatments recommended include turpentine, benzoline, Persian insect powder, which is made from dried chrysanthemum flowers and which actually works on some insects though not reliably on bedbugs, and heat. the direct application of heat to the affected surfaces. The heat method is interesting. You file it away. The same book, in a section on domestic economy, recommends that the bedsteads be examined regularly and that iron or brass bedsteads be preferred over wooden ones, because wood harbours insects and iron or brass does not. This is sound advice and widely available advice in 1862, and the Hartwells, like a great many wealthy Victorian families, have wooden beds with mahogany headboards and carved details and joints and crevices that are architecturally perfect for insects, because mahogany beds are fashionable, and fashion in 1862 does not bend for practicality. The people who have iron beds, by and large, are the people who cannot afford mahogany, the working class and the lower middle class and the servants, in their functional iron-framed beds, have in this one specific instance the superior situation. Mr. Tiffin knows this. Mrs. Beach knows this. The Hartwells' beds remain mahogany. December arrives. The house fills with the preparations for Christmas, the greenery ordered, the extra provisions, the plans for Mrs. Hartwell's sister and her family. Mrs. Hartwell's sister's family includes 3 children under the age of 10 and a husband who has opinions about port, and their arrival requires considerable preparation of the guest rooms and considerable extra work from everyone below stairs. You have been in the house for 2 months now. You know the sounds it makes at night, the boiler sighing, the pipes ticking as they cool, the creak of the main staircase at particular steps, the way the kitchen fire talks to itself in the small hours. You know the family's rhythms, Mr. Hartwell's habit of going to the study at 10 and staying until midnight, the reading lamp burning late, the smell of his cigars drifting very faintly down toward the kitchen passage, Mrs. Hartwell's Tuesday calls and Friday charitable commitments, and the particular tone of her voice when she is satisfied versus when she's managing her dissatisfaction. Miss Harriet's music, which you hear from everywhere in the house when she practices, the same passages repeated with a patience that speaks of serious discipline. You have also become, quietly and without announcing it, the person most likely to notice the trouble when it recurs. Not because you've been appointed to this role, but because you pay attention in the way that some people do and some people don't, and in a house where the trouble is never fully gone, only managed. The person who pays attention is the person who knows first. In mid-December, you notice the smell again in the morning room, very faint. You say nothing to anyone. You examine the baseboard in the corner that concerned you before. Nothing visible, but the smell. You wash the baseboard yourself with hot vinegar water and washing soda, which is within your duties and requires no explanation. You do it thoroughly. You do the whole morning room baseboard while you're at it. Mrs. Beach notices and raises an eyebrow. Smell, you say. She looks at the baseboard. She looks at you. She nods. Tell me if it gets stronger. It does not get stronger. Not for 3 weeks. You keep washing the baseboard on your regular cleaning rounds. The smell stays faint and does not progress. This is the other thing Mr. Tiffin did not tell you, though perhaps he assumed you would work it out, that regular thorough cleaning with strong solutions, hot water, vinegar, washing soda, does not kill a large infestation, but does, applied consistently, slow the progression of a small one. Not a cure, a maintenance. A steady assertion of the human will against the insect's biology. You learn this not from a book, and not from a professional, but from the texture of the work itself, from the evidence of your own hands and the evidence of your own arm, which has stopped producing new bites. Christmas comes. The house fills with voices. The children run upstairs and downstairs and through rooms they shouldn't be in, and bring a kind of kinetic energy that transforms the house temporarily into something that feels less like a stage set and more like a place people actually live in. Mrs. Hartwell's sister is a large, energetic woman with a loud laugh who appears to have come to the conclusion that the rules applying to her at home do not apply here, and who comes into the kitchen twice on the first day to compliment Mrs. Beach in a way that is well-intentioned and slightly patronising, and that Mrs. Beach accepts with the gracious patience of someone being tolerated. The children eat everything and require more of everything, and wake too early and sleep too late. And one of the smaller ones, a boy of perhaps 6, brings into the house on his coat, from wherever they have come from in Hampshire, 2 or 3 small hitchhikers that he is not aware of, and that will, after Christmas, have opinions about the morning room sofa. You do not discover this until February. Let me tell you about the thing nobody in this house will say, which is this: bedbugs are not a problem of poverty. This is the thing that the Victorian establishment, the respectable classes, the moral reformers who built the sanitary movement on the premise that cleanliness was a virtue and dirt was a failing, this is the thing they cannot accommodate within their framework. Because if bedbugs are not a problem of poverty, then they cannot be explained by the failures of the poor. And if they cannot be explained by the failures of the poor, then the entire narrative structure that connects physical cleanliness to moral worth begins to show its cracks. Cimex lectularius does not care about your income. It does not prefer the beds of the poor. It prefers warmth and the presence of a sleeping mammal and dark, narrow spaces to hide in during the day, and these things exist in wealthy houses exactly as they exist in poor ones. The wealthy house has more furniture with more joints and more wallpaper, with more paste and more fabric with more folds, which actually gives the bugs more places to live, which is why, at the height of the Victorian bug-destroying business, Tiffin & Son were treating houses in Mayfair and Belgravia and Kensington the most expensive addresses in England. The bug man, when he arrives, comes to houses like this one not because houses like this one are unusual cases, but because they are typical cases with the money to do something about it. The houses that can't afford Tiffin & Son are also infested. The houses that can't afford any treatment at all are very badly infested. But the narrative, the story that the Victorians tell themselves about this, when they have to tell themselves anything at all, says that it is the poor neighbourhoods, the overcrowded rookeries of Seven Dials and St Giles, the tenements of Whitechapel where the bugs live. The respectable houses are unfortunate exceptions, individual misfortunes, not a systemic condition. This is false. Everyone in the household management business, everyone who deals with this professionally, knows it is false. But the false narrative is deeply entrenched and serves important social functions, and so it persists. What you're watching, from your position as an under-housemaid at number 47, is the machinery of that false narrative in operation. The bug man arrives at the back door and leaves at the back door, and his invoice describes general domestic maintenance. The mattresses are treated and restuffed, and the word mattress is not spoken in front of the family. The baseboard is washed and the smell managed and the problem contained, and when anyone asks, which nobody does because asking would be rude, the answer is that the house has always been very well maintained and there is really nothing to report. This is Victorian England, the most powerful nation in the world at the height of its confidence and its wealth and its conviction of its own superiority. A nation that built railways across continents and deployed gunboats on behalf of trade and produced art and science and literature of extraordinary quality. Also, a nation that went to bed every night with small reddish-brown insects in the seams of its mattresses and did not speak about it. You're learning to hold both of these things simultaneously, the grandeur and the reality underneath it, the beauty and the practical horror of the everyday. In March, a thing happens that rearranges your understanding of several things at once. It is a Wednesday. Mrs. Hartwell has gone out with Miss Harriet to a musical afternoon at a house in Eaton Square. Mr. Hartwell is at his offices. Thomas is upstairs polishing the silver. Mr. Plum has gone to the wine merchant. Elsie is in the scullery. Mrs. Beach is in the kitchen. And you are on the second-floor landing with a bucket of washing water and a cloth, doing the woodwork on the banisters, which is a task that falls to no one in particular but gets done when someone notices it needs doing, when you hear from Miss Harriet's room a sound. Not a large sound, not an alarming sound in any ordinary sense, a soft rhythmic sound like something moving in the walls. You stop, you hold still, you know this sound. You've been hearing versions of it since October in different rooms. The sound of something in the wall, specifically the sound of something in the wall behind the replacement wallpaper in Miss Harriet's room, which was repapered in mid-November by a paper hanger who came at Mrs. Beach's direction and who applied new green and white paper over the treated plaster. The plaster was not quite dry when he came. This is the thing you noticed at the time and said nothing about, because it was not your place to say. The plaster was still slightly damp from the treatment and from the November moisture in the air, and the paper hanger pressed the new paper against it anyway, because he had a schedule and the family wanted the room back, and damp plaster under new paper means the paper goes up with an imperfect bond, and an imperfect bond means gaps, and gaps mean... You open Miss Harriet's door. The room is empty and still in the March afternoon light, the green and white paper looking fresh and clean in the pale sun. The window is slightly open, the white curtains lifting very gently in the draught. The bed is made, the counterpane smooth, the pillows symmetrical. You stand just inside the door. You listen. The sound is coming from the wall behind the bed, which is the inner wall, the one where the paper lifting was worst and the treatment was most thoroughly applied and the new paper was hung over the imperfectly dried plaster. You move the bed, you move the side of it nearest the wall, carefully, an inch, then another inch, until you can see the baseboard behind the headboard. You crouch down. At the joint where the baseboard meets the new wallpaper, at the very bottom where the paper should be pressed flat against the plaster, there is a small but definite gap. The paper is lifted away from the wall in a strip no wider than your thumb. Behind the gap the plaster is visible, and on the plaster at the edge of the gap there is the thin dark staining that you know means only one thing. You stand up, you move the bed back, you look at the room for a moment, your hands on your hips, thinking with the calm clarity that comes after the initial recognition, after the stomach drops and comes back and the mind settles round the new information. This is not October's infestation returned from hiding. This is the thing that Mr. Tiffin warned about and the paper hanger's haste made inevitable. A colony that survived the treatment in the plaster itself, in the fine network of hairline cracks that run through old Victorian plaster, like the circulatory system of the house. And that has now found a path back through the gap, where the new paper didn't seal properly, and is re-establishing itself in the new paper's paste. Victorian wallpaper paste is made from flour and water with various additives. It is, from a bedbug's perspective, food. You go downstairs. You tell Mrs. Beach. She receives this information with the same stillness she brings to all information that is unwelcome and also not surprising. She pours herself a cup of tea. She pours you one without asking. She sits down. "How bad?" she asks. "Not bad yet. Early, but it's in the wall." She drinks her tea. "Mr. Tiffin will need to come back. The paper hanger should have waited for the plaster to dry." "Yes," she says, "he should have." The implication hangs in the air between you, that she knew this, that you knew this, that the right time to say it was when it was happening, and neither of you had the standing within the household's hierarchy of authority to say it in a way that would have been acted upon. The paper hanger was there on Mrs. Hartwell's instruction. His schedule was set. The room needed to be back. This is one of the lessons of this house, which is perhaps also one of the lessons of the larger world that this house is a perfect small model of. The people who know what needs doing are often not the people with the authority to insist on it. And the people with the authority to insist on it often do not know, or do not want to know, or know but have other priorities. The bugs don't care. The bugs are in the plaster doing what bugs do. "I'll speak to Mrs. Hartwell when she returns," Mrs. Beach says. She looks at you over the cup. You noticed it early. "The sound through the wall," she nods. She says nothing else. But you understand, from the particular quality of her silence, that this is being noted. That the capacity to notice things early is a thing of value in this house. And that value, however it is denominated in a world where your annual income is £4 and your bed is in the attic, is a real thing, and real things accumulate. You're told, on a Tuesday in April, by then you have been at number 47 for 7 months, and the second treatment has been done, and the plaster has properly dried this time, and the new paper has been hung with the proper patience of plaster that was allowed to cure for 3 weeks before the paper hanger was called. You are told by Mrs. Beach that she has spoken to Mrs. Hartwell about your prospects in the house. The news is that you're to be promoted to housemaid rather than under housemaid in the autumn, when a vacancy occurs, which Mrs. Beach seems confident will occur, though she does not say why. The increase in wage will be £1.10 per quarter. You'll take on some of Nora's responsibilities, which Nora is being promoted away from, again into a position Mrs. Beach is confident will occur. You thank her. You go back to the grate you were cleaning when she found you. You finish the grate. You light it. You sit back on your heels for a moment and watch the fire take, the paper blackening and curling before the small sticks catch, the particular smell of new fire in a cleaned grate, which is at once the smell of ash and coal dust, and the first heat, the fresh carbon beginning, £1.10 per quarter, which is not much, which is a meaningful change. You're 16 and 4 months old, and you've been in London long enough to know a few things about yourself that you did not know when you arrived. You know that you can do physical work for long hours without stopping. You know that you can notice things. You know that the discomfort of cold and tiredness and ache in arms, while real, is not the end of anything. You know that the bugs in the mattress seams do not mean the mattress is worthless, only that it needs attention. You know that the way to manage a house, which is to say the way to manage a large complicated system that requires continuous maintenance, that contains within it multiple competing interests and multiple sources of failure, that must present a clean face to the world while its inner workings are significantly messier, is not to pretend the difficult things don't exist, but to address them early and consistently and without ceremony, and then get on with the rest of it. You learned this from bedbugs. This seems unlikely, but there it is. On a Sunday afternoon in late April, you're given 3 hours of free time, which is the most free time you have had at once since arriving. The family is at a long luncheon elsewhere. Elsie has gone to her family in Whitechapel. Mrs. Beach is sleeping, genuinely sleeping, in the chair by the kitchen fire, her hands folded in her lap, and her breathing slow and even in a way that suggests she's needed this for weeks. Thomas has gone somewhere he hasn't mentioned. Mr. Plum is at church. Nora takes you to the park. The park is Battersea Fields, which is not quite a formal park yet. That will come later, the landscaping and the formal paths in the pleasure gardens, but is currently a wide expanse of open ground south of the river, where people go on Sundays to be out of the city's wait for a few hours. You cross the river on the bridge at Chelsea, the bridge that replaced a much older crossing, and you walk out into the spring afternoon. The air on the south side of the river is different from Belgravia. Not cleaner exactly. Nothing south of the river in 1862 is what you'd call clean, but different in its character. Less concentrated. The buildings are lower and more scattered, and the sky is more visible than in the narrow streets of Belgravia, and the light comes down in a different way, more evenly, without the deep shadow of tall Georgian terraces. Battersea in April is the particular April of a city that has been under coal smoke all winter. The green of the new grass almost aggressively green against the grey-brown of the remaining mud. The few trees along the river's edge covered in new leaves with the specific delicacy of first growth, thin and bright, and very slightly translucent when the sun is behind them. The river is silver and wide here, the tide out, the mud banks exposed, a few gulls working along the edge. You stand on the higher ground for a moment, with the river below you and the city across it. London from this side is a long horizon of rooftops and chimneys and church towers, and rising above all of it to the east and slightly north, the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, which is visible from everywhere in the city except where the buildings have grown tall enough to obscure it, which in 1862 is not yet many places. The dome catches the afternoon light. The city below it is grey and complex and enormous, the chimneys of several thousand households putting their smoke into the April sky, the whole mass of it simultaneously magnificent and oppressive and alive in the way that only very large concentrations of human activity are alive. You are standing on the south bank of the Thames looking at the greatest city in the world, and you have been inside it for 7 months, and you know things about it that tourists never know, and that the family at number 47 would never be told. You know the smell of its rooms at 5 in the morning. You know what lives in the dark of its walls. You know the back stairs and the service entrances and the green baize doors and the particular social physics of a world that runs entirely on people who are not supposed to be seen doing work that would stop if they stopped. You know about the bedbugs. Not just in the Hartwell house. Everyone who works below stairs in a house in this city knows about bedbugs. It is one of the shared knowledges of domestic service, passed from housekeeper to maid to scullery girl, in the same way information always moves in houses like this one, downward through the hierarchy in carefully edited form. The servants of Belgravia and Mayfair and Kensington all have the same conversations, in the same kitchen passages about the same problem, which everyone has and no one admits to. The second-hand furniture trade carries them across the city. You know this now because you've been watching on your trips to the market and the apothecary and the various suppliers Mrs. Beach sends you to, watching with the attentiveness that is now a habit. the furniture seller in Elizabeth Street who has a wagon of second-hand pieces every Thursday, the upholstered chair in the window with the worn arms, the horsehair sofa with the repaired leg. Some of these pieces are perfectly clean, some of them are not. Nobody checks. Nobody's obliged to check. The railways carry them out of the city. This you learned from Nora, who learned it from the previous housekeeper, who learned it from the housekeeper before that. The upholstered seats of railway carriages are inspected not at all between the major maintenance periods, which occur on schedules determined by the railway companies and which do not account for what happens to upholstered seats that carry passengers from London to Birmingham and Birmingham to Manchester and Manchester to Leeds and back again day after day, picking up and depositing travellers and everything the travellers carry, including things they do not know they are carrying. This is how bugs move. This is how they moved from wherever they originated, and the entomologists who are beginning in 1862 to study them more systematically cannot entirely agree on this, though the evidence points to somewhere in the tropics, brought to Europe in the bedding or the wooden storage crates of early traders, into the Roman legions, who seem to have known about them, whose references to certain small biting flat insects in the quarters have been noted, and from the legions into the buildings of Roman Britain, and from those buildings through 17 centuries of human habitation in increasingly dense and crowded conditions, into the house at number 47 Belgrave Crescent, where they are presently, in the spring of 1862, in retreat but not defeated. The Roman legions had them, the Tudor courts had them, the Elizabethans had them, and wrote about various ineffective treatments, including the application of ox bile, which could not have been pleasant for anyone involved. The Stuarts had them. The Georgians had them and called them by various names and incorporated them into their considerable literature of complaint about the discomforts of English domestic life. The Victorians have them and do not talk about it. All of this passes through your mind while you stand on the south bank looking at the city. Then Nora says that she wants a cup of tea, and there is a stall 50 yards along the path, and you follow her, and the grass is soft under your feet after the stone flags of the house, and the trees along the river are bright green, and the river itself is silver and wide, and the tea from the stall is not as good as Mrs. Beech's, but it is hot, and you're outside, and the sky above is very large and pale blue with a few clouds moving west. You drink the tea, you watch the river. Nora, you say, do you think about leaving? She considers this. She's 20 years old and has been in service since she was 15, and she considers the question with the seriousness of someone who has thought about it many times. Sometimes, she says, where would I go? That's the question. My sister works in a milliner's shop on the Strand. She earns less than I do and stands all day, and her feet hurt her constantly. She sips her tea. My brother went to Canada 3 years ago. He writes that it's very large and very cold. She pauses. I think about the milliner's shop sometimes. Not because it's better, just because it's different. Different might be enough. Might be, she says. Not yet for me, but someday. You think about Lincolnshire, the fields outside Brigg in summer, which are flat and green and enormous in the way of places that have no hills to interrupt the view, and the sky above them, which is the biggest sky you've ever seen, bigger even than the London sky because there's nothing to compete with it. The kitchen of the house where you grew up, which was small and smoky, and smelled of the same coal fire and the same cabbage, and also of your mother, who smelled of bread and lavender water. You think about your mother, who died of a fever which is to say she died of something that in 1862 cannot be identified precisely and treated effectively because the germ theory of disease is only beginning to emerge from the work of men like Pasteur and Snow, and is not yet the settled science it will become. And so she died as people die of fevers in 1862, quickly and in discomfort, in the front bedroom of the small house outside Brigg, while you were 12 years old and sitting on the stairs, unable to go in and unable to go away. She would be interested in all of this, you think. The bugs and the bug man and the mercury sublimate and the wallpaper paste. She was interested in practical problems, in the machinery of things. She would have wanted to understand exactly how the bug works, its life cycle and its habits and the logic of its persistence. You know something about this now. You have been reading, in your scant evening hours, from anything you can find on the subject. The volume on domestic management is thorough but not deep. But there is a pamphlet that Nora obtained from somewhere, a publication from a natural history society, dry and small printed, which discusses Cymex lectularius in the plain clinical language of someone who has observed the insect closely without finding anything particularly surprising about it. The life cycle is this. A female bedbug lays between 200 and 500 eggs in her lifetime. She lays them in small clusters, 1 to 12 at a time, in any crack or crevice near the host's sleeping area. The eggs are sticky and very small, approximately 1 millimetre long, white and curved, and they hatch in 1 to 2 weeks at room temperature. The nymph that hatches is tiny, pale, and requires a blood meal before it can develop to the next instar. There are 5 instars before the nymph reaches adulthood. Each instar requires a blood meal. The whole process from egg to adult takes approximately 5 to 7 weeks under good conditions. Good conditions meaning sufficient warmth and a regular supply of blood. The adult bug can survive for over a year without feeding, up to 18 months in some recorded cases. This is what makes them so difficult to eliminate. You can leave a house empty for a month and come back to find the bugs exactly as you left them, waiting with the calm patience of creatures that operate on a different relationship to time than you do, waiting and not dying. The mercury sublimate kills the adults and many of the nymphs on contact. It does not reliably kill the eggs, which are protected by their hard shells and their adhesive coating, tucked deep into crevices where the solution may not penetrate fully. This is why treatments require repetition. This is why the household at number 47 is on its second treatment, and may well be on a third, not because Mr. Tiffin is ineffective, but because the biology of the thing is working against any single treatment, because you cannot reach all the eggs, because some will always survive and some will always hatch. The heat method is more reliably lethal to eggs, but more difficult to apply in a furnished room without causing other damage. The pamphlet recommends the use of steam, directed into crevices by means of a nozzle, which penetrates the cracks that mercury solution does not. You mentioned this to Mrs. Beach. She looked at it for a moment. Where would we get a steam apparatus? I don't know. Maybe Mr. Tiffin has one. I'll ask him, she said. She did ask him, the next time he came. He did have one. It added to the cost. It was used on the plaster in Miss Harriet's room before the new paper went on, and you are fairly certain, based on the absence of the smell and the absence of new bites since January, that the inner wall is now properly clear. Fairly certain. With bedbugs you learn not to be entirely certain. You learn to be vigilant in the way of someone who has accepted that vigilance is permanent, not temporary. Let me tell you something that will sound like a piece of very dark comedy, but is simply true. In 1862, while you're stripping wallpaper and boiling mattress covers and washing baseboards with vinegar water and learning the habits of Chimex lectularius more thoroughly than you ever imagined you would, there is a man in London whose job involves studying the insects professionally. Not a bug destroyer, a naturalist, a fellow of a scientific society with a small dark room full of jars and slides and a brass microscope with a good lens, who has spent several years collecting specimens of various household insects and observing them and writing about them in the dry, precise language of Victorian natural history. His name is not important. His observations are. He has noted, among other things, that the bedbug moves primarily by hitchhiking, by attaching itself to clothing, to luggage, to furniture, rather than by walking long distances on its own. He has noted that it is primarily nocturnal, and that it is attracted to warmth, and to the carbon dioxide exhaled by a sleeping person, which it detects with its antennae, and which guides it toward the host in the dark. He has noted that it does not leap or fly, which is why it cannot travel easily between houses on its own, and that its primary vector is human activity, the second-hand trade, the shared conveyance, the lodging-house bed. He has also noted with a dry precision that is probably as close to irony as Victorian natural history gets, that the insect is found in greatest concentrations not, as popular belief would have it, in the homes of the poor, but in the homes of the wealthy, particularly in the furnished rooms of large houses that have been continuously occupied for many decades, where the furniture is old and the joins are many, and the number of warm sleeping bodies is sufficient to support a large and established population. This observation is published in the proceedings of the relevant society. It is read by perhaps 40 people. It does not change the popular narrative. It does not change the way the wealthy talk about bedbugs, or the way they talk about the poor, or the way the poor are blamed for the problems that infest the houses of the wealthy. Information and understanding are different things. This is another lesson that this house is teaching you, one that will prove more durable and more widely applicable than the specific knowledge of bug biology. Summer comes. The house on Belgrave Crescent shifts with the season, in the way that all Victorian townhouses shift with summer. The coal fires go out in the bedrooms and the drawing rooms, and the house becomes lighter and airier, and the windows are opened more freely, and the heavy curtains are taken down and replaced with lighter ones, and the Turkish carpets are rolled and beaten and relaid, and the family rearranges itself to accommodate the longer days and the social season that fills them. Miss Harriet is out constantly. The round of calls and parties and concerts and exhibitions that constitutes a young lady's social existence in the London season fills her days from 11 in the morning until 10 or 11 at night, and she comes home flushed and bright-eyed, and sometimes slightly dishevelled in ways that Miss Harriet, being 17, does not yet know she should manage better. The summer also brings the bugs back more actively. Summer warmth accelerates their biology, shortens the time between egg and adult, increases their activity. This is the bad time of year. The August nights in the Hartwell household require the regular washing of the baseboards in Miss Harriet's room and the morning room, which you do on your own initiative, on your regular cleaning rounds, without instructions. Mrs. Beach observes this and says nothing. Mrs. Beach's saying nothing, you have learned, is often the most eloquent thing she says. One August afternoon, you are in the morning room with the baseboard brush and a bucket of hot washing soda solution when Mrs. Hartwell comes in. This happens occasionally. The family enters a room that you're working in, and you're supposed to become functionally invisible, which involves continuing to work without making eye contact or noise or any movement that draws attention to your existence. You continue working. The brush moves along the baseboard in the smooth practice circles that are now automatic. The washing soda solution is hot enough to be slightly uncomfortable on your hands, but not quite burning, and the smell of it is sharp and mineral and clean. Mrs. Hartwell stops in the middle of the room. She looks at what you are doing. You can see her feet and the hem of her morning dress. A pause. You do that every week, she says. This is not a question. It is an observation. Her voice has a quality you haven't heard in it before, something careful and slightly uncertain, as though she's approaching a subject from a direction she hasn't used before. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Beach asked you to? I do it on my own, you say. It helps. A longer pause. The feet don't move. You continue the baseboard. Does it? She says. Does it actually help? You stop working, you look up. Meeting her eyes is something you're not supposed to do, not because anyone has told you so explicitly, but because the conventions are clear and you understand them. But you meet her eyes now because the question is a real question and requires a real answer. Mrs. Hartwell is 38 years old, and up close, in the August afternoon light, she looks less like a composition of good taste and social assurance than she does at meals and in the drawing room when the professional presentation is fully assembled. She looks tired. There are marks on her wrist that are not fresh bites, but are the faded marks of old ones, weeks old, the kind of marks that take longer to fade on certain skin types than on others. She's been managing this for a long time. It helps, you say. It doesn't fix it, but it slows it down. She looks at you. She looks at the baseboard. She looks at the bucket. I see, she says. She goes out of the room. She doesn't say anything else. You turn back to the baseboard and continue. Nothing is different after this. Everything is different after this, by a small and precise amount that is difficult to name. Something has been acknowledged in the room that has never been acknowledged before. Not in those words, not between those two people. It has been acknowledged and immediately contained within the existing conventions, which is the only way anything of this kind moves forward in a house like this one, incrementally within the available space, never faster than the conventions permit. But it was said. She asked whether it helped, and she waited for a real answer, and she received one. On a November morning of your second year, you're 17 now, you've been at number 47 for over a year, you're a housemaid rather than an under-housemaid. And the new under-housemaid is a girl from Shropshire named Clara, who is 15 and has the same slightly stunned quality you had a year ago. Mrs. Beach calls you into the kitchen at a time that is not a meal time and not a work direction time, and pours 2 cups of tea without asking, which is the 3rd time she has done this, and you know by now that it signifies something worth attending to. She sits down. She looks at her tea for a moment. Then she says, Mrs. Hartwell has asked me to speak to you. You wait. She would like you to take responsibility for the management of the... She pauses here, a tiny pause that is the last trace of the old convention, the habit of not naming it. Then, the bedbug management in the house, the regular washing schedule, the early detection, the arrangements with Mr. Tiffin when necessary. You're quiet for a moment. That's normally your responsibility, you say. Yes. I'm passing it to you because you're better at it than I am. She says this with the particular flatness of someone stating a fact they have checked from several angles and confirmed. You notice things early. You know what to look for. You know the biology of it now. I've seen you reading about it. She looks at you directly. I'll handle the invoice side and the communication with Mrs. Hartwell. You handle the house. Yes, you say. She nods. She picks up her tea. Subject closed. You sit with your cup and think about what has just happened, which is that you have been given a responsibility that is real and specific and involves using knowledge you have built for yourself through a year of close observation and steady attention. Not a large responsibility, not a transformation, a small promotion in the domestic hierarchy of a house that most of the world will never notice, a thing that happened below stairs while the family lived their lives above. But it is yours. You worked for it in a way that nobody asked you to and nobody expected you to, and nobody particularly noticed while you were doing it, except that it needed to be done, and you did it. Outside, the November fog is lying against the windows of the kitchen. The range is lit and the kitchen is warm, and Elsie is washing the breakfast dishes with the focused efficiency she's developed over the past year. The startled quality less present now, replaced by something more settled, more purposeful. Clara, upstairs, is doing the second-floor bedrooms, learning the great technique from you the way you learned it from Nora. The house runs. This is the thing. The house always runs. The families upstairs come and go and have their dramas and their ambitions and their social catastrophes and their great moments, and the house runs beneath all of it, run by people who are rarely named and often invisible, who clean the grates before dawn and carry the hot water upstairs and wash the baseboards and strip the mattresses and do all the continuous, unglamorous maintenance that keeps the beautiful Victorian townhouse functioning as a beautiful Victorian townhouse rather than a damp, dark, insect-infested ruin. You know about the insects, you know about the damp, you know about all the things that the house would become without the work that you and Mrs. Beach and Nora and Elsie and Clara do every day in the before hours and the after hours, invisibly, in the rooms the family doesn't see. This knowledge is not nothing. It is not glamorous. It will not make your name known. It will not earn you the admiration of anyone likely to be writing about this period in 50 years. But it is real, and you carry it with the weight and the specificity of something that was earned by direct contact with the actual world. The bugs are managed. The house is clean. The grates are lit. There is the first fire of the morning, the one you laid before 5:30 in the kitchen grate. The coal sits correctly, the pieces not too large and not too close, the draught working through them with the low steady sound of combustion. The heat begins. The kitchen, which was cold at 5 and is now approaching warm, will be fully warm by 6, and Mrs. Beach will make the porridge and you will carry the breakfast things, and the house will begin another day of the continuous work that it always requires. In November of 1862 in Belgravia, in the greatest city in the world, you are invisible. The work is visible only in its results. The family upstairs wakes into warm rooms and clean sheets and polished brasses and aired mattresses and baseboards that smell of washing soda rather than the other thing, and they do not think about why these things are so. This is how it works. This is how it has always worked. This is how it'll keep working long after you have moved on into some other house, some other position, carrying the knowledge you built here in your hands and your memory and your fine calibrated attention. The bugs know. The bugs are always there, in the cracks and the seams and the hairline fractures in the old plaster, patient and persistent and indifferent to the human arrangements above them. They are there in the Hartwell house, and in every house in the terrace and in the houses across the crescent, and in the great houses of Mayfair and the modest houses of Pimlico, and the tenements of Whitechapel, all of them, the whole inseparable spectrum of London habitation. They will be there in the houses that replace these houses. They'll find the joints of the new furniture and the seams of the new mattresses and the cracks in the new plaster. They will adapt. They are extraordinarily good at adapting. But so, it turns out, are you. You carry the coal scuttle up to the first floor. Your arms are strong from a year of this work. No longer the burning exhaustion of October, but something reliable and functional, a body that has learned its work. Your lower back is fine. The hip ache is gone, replaced by a muscular knowledge of how to lift and carry without strain that arrived without announcement sometime in the spring. Your hands are calloused at the fingertips and along the palm from the various brushes, and occasionally they crack in very cold weather, and you rub them with petroleum jelly at night, which helps. You carry the coal up the stairs and set the scuttle down by the first-floor fireplace and begin to lay the fire, the paper first, then the small sticks, then the coal arranged in the right configuration, not too tight. You take the matches from the box by the mantel. You strike one. The small flame appears, yellow and clear, and you touch it to the paper. The paper catches. The small sticks begin. The coal, in a few minutes, will take. You watch the fire for a moment. This is the thing about fires that is constant. They always start the same way. Paper, sticks, coal. The small flame becomes the larger flame, becomes the heat that fills the room. Nothing complicated, nothing that requires explaining. The bugs in the wall, if there are any, and there may be, there are usually some, there are always some, are in their cracks, waiting for the dark and the warmth of a sleeping body. They are patient. They will wait. But the fire is lit now. The room is warming. The house is running. And on the stairs, going down to the kitchen to start the next fire, you're thinking about nothing in particular except the next thing that needs doing, which is the morning room, which is the one you always watch most carefully, where the baseboard meets the wall in the corner behind the sofa, and where the smell, when it comes back, always comes first. You'll check it when you get there. You'll check it carefully. You'll take your time. This is the work. This is what it means to understand the thing that nobody in this house will say directly. Not crisis management, not panic, just steady, consistent, attentive work, done well, done every day, in the dark before the house wakes. You go downstairs. The fire upstairs is burning properly now. You can hear it, faintly through the floors. The low, reliable sound of combustion doing what combustion does, consuming what is given to it and giving back heat. Somewhere in the walls, small things are waiting. You will get to them before they become a problem. This is what you do. Outside, the November morning is coming up grey and cold, the fog settling against the windows of the terraces. The gaslights on Belgrave Crescent each in their own small circle of orange light. Another day in London, 1862, in the most powerful city in the world, in a house full of people who are each making their way through the century as best they can with the tools they were given and the knowledge they were able to build. The kitchen range is lit. Mrs. Beach is making bread. Elsie is washing the morning things. Clara upstairs is learning to do the grates the right way. The bugs are there. The bugs are always there. You are there too. Let the night settle around you now. The house on Belgrave Crescent is quiet. The fires are banked. The family is asleep, in their warm beds with their clean linen, in the rooms that smell of fresh plaster, beeswax, and very faintly of turpentine, which nobody mentions. Below stairs, the kitchen fire has been brought down to coals for the night. The bread is baked and cooling on the shelf. The washing soda is in its tin, and the black lead is in its tin, and the brushes are in their proper places, the stiff one and the soft one, the brass one and the wood one. Your room in the attic is cold. The blanket is the same thin blanket it always was. The new flock mattress does not smell of anything except wool. You lie down and pull the blanket up. The church bell somewhere close strikes the half-hour past 10, then the full hour of 11. The sound moves through the November fog, clear and then gone, the way all sounds go at this hour. Your arm does not itch. Your hands, slightly rough from the day's work, rest on the blanket. You can feel the raised calluses at your fingertips, the smooth worn places at the palm. These are not injuries. These are the record of specific work, the body's memory of what it has learned to do. Outside, London breathes and burns and moves in the night. The watermen are off their boats now, or nearly so. The night watchmen are making their rounds. The fog is thickening, the gas lamps hazing, the great machinery of the city slowing toward its quietest point, which is never quite quiet, never fully still, always retaining some residual motion, some fire somewhere burning, some wheel still turning. Tomorrow starts at 5:30. The bells will ring, the fires will need laying, the grates will need cleaning, the baseboard in the morning room will need checking. But that is tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, there is only the thin blanket and the sound of Clara's breathing beside you, already slow and even, asleep before 10 minutes are out, the way the young and tired and satisfied sleep. There is the cold that comes in through the window gap, and the warmth that comes up through the floorboards from the house below. There is the smell of the new flock mattress and the smell of coal dust still in your clothes, and faintly, very faintly, the clean mineral smell of washing soda on your hands. No other smell, not tonight. You close your eyes. The city's heartbeat, below and around you, continues. It has been beating like this for 1,000 years. It will beat like this for 1,000 more. The streets will change, and the buildings will change, and the people will change, and the great Victorian certainties about cleanliness and virtue and the proper order of things will change more thoroughly than anyone in 1862 can quite imagine. But people will still go to sleep in their beds, and in the walls of their houses, in the seams of their mattresses, in the hairline cracks in the old plaster, small things will still be waiting. And somewhere, in some attic room or housekeeper's kitchen or morning room baseboard, someone will be paying attention. Let sleep come now. Let the last waking thought be the small, reliable thought that you have managed what you could manage today, and tomorrow you will manage what you can manage tomorrow, and this is enough. It has always been enough. It is the only kind of enough there is. The fog is against the window. The city breathes. You are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. The bells do not ring for another 7 hours. Let the darkness take you. Let the long quiet pull you down, past the tired ache of your shoulders and the specific roughness of your hands and the half-formed thoughts about baseboards and mercury solution, and the smell that tells you what you need to know before anyone else knows it. Let it all go quiet. The house breathes around you, its wood and plaster and brick, its joints and crevices and the slow life of everything that lives in those crevices, whether you want it there or not. You cannot fight it all. You can manage it steadily, every day, without ceremony and without fuss. That's enough. That's the work. Good night.